A term that is seldom absent in archaeological discussions is material culture, and with good reason. Material culture encompasses all the stuff on which archaeological interpretation rests. Walls, temples, and palaces afford discussions of city planning and the origins of cities, but water jugs, cooking pots, and wine bottles too illustrate daily life. Though architecture preoccupies our conception of what archaeologists study, it is day-to-day stuff that without which archaeologists would be able to say very little. More often than not, this stuff is broken junk. Finding glass vessels on Roman archaeological sites is, as you might imagine, a rare occurrence, which is a particularly frustrating reality because glass is known to have been produced and used extensively throughout the Roman Empire. What is known about Roman glass has been gleaned from curious digressions in historical works, from artistic depictions of glassworkers plying their craft, like right there, and from preserved vessels found in tombs and other hermetic environments. An archaeologist's usual experience with glass, however, really consists of recording the weight and number of glass fragments found during excavation. Considering the archaeology of Roman glass, then, the Togo Salmon Gallery is a veritable treasure trove. This is a bunch of stuff about which an archaeologist can say very much indeed. So I will endeavor to try to kind of sketch out in the rough a history of glass today, just so you can come to know it better. The melting of sand to make glass dates to, at the latest, to the 13th century BC, as inferred from the mention of Koan Urgos, or glassmaker, on Linear B administrative tablets. The existence of glass ingots on the Ulubrun shipwreck, way over here, the coast of Turkey, supports this date for the origin of glassmaking, as do glass ornamental beads found on the Mycenaean citadel of Tiryns, way over here. The production of glassware proper, however, is attributable to New Kingdom Egypt, 1500s BC, where the core forming method was first employed. By the late 8th to 7th century BC, colorless glass vessels were produced in great quantities in Asia Minor and Assyria, modern-day Turkey, Syria, and Iraq. These colorless vessels continued to be made well into the 5th century BC in the Persian Empire, as apparent in Aristophanes' play The Acharnians, where a guest speaker coming back from being received in the Persian court says, "And being received as guests, we perforce drank sweet unmixed wine from glass and gold beakers." The original noun from which the adjective used here derives is hualos, which by the 4th century BC was used to refer exclusively to man-made glass. The word, tellingly, may ultimately derive from an Egyptian word, thus reflecting the Egyptian origins of glass manufacturing. Hualos, before the widespread experience with man-made glass, was used in Greek to describe transparent stone or rock crystal. Similarly, the Latin word for glass, vitrum, was used to describe transparent gemstones like emerald, amethyst, and so on. In the 3rd century BC, Alexandrine glass was both produced in abundance and was celebrated for its craftsmanship. Alexandria consequently was known as the dominant center of glassware production in the Hellenistic world. The majority of evidence concerning pre-Roman glass, then, indicates that glassmaking and glassware manufacturing were innovations and traditions of the Eastern Mediterranean, despite later Greek renown in glass production. Glassmaking, then, was not a Roman invention, but the glass-blown vessel was, and an innovation of the Roman imperial period, some 300 years after the apogee of Greek glassmaking. Glass blowing was likely invented at some point during the early years of the reign of Augustus, that is, between 27 BC and 14 AD. As previously mentioned, the preponderance of evidence suggests that an Eastern Mediterranean origin for glass making in general. As one might expect, the invention of glass blowing is also attributed to Eastern Mediterranean craftsmen, principally Syro-Palestinians. Glass blowing, unlike core forming or rod forming, relied not upon melting glass around a solid object, but rather, as the name implies, blowing air into a piece of molten glass through a terracotta or iron tube to form the interior of the vessel. This allowed not only for more rapid production of glassware, especially in used in tandem with a mold, but also for more complex designs and voluminous shapes. The utility of this new method for glass manufacturing was readily recognized. By the mid-1st century AD, glassblowing had spread from the eastern Mediterranean to southern Europe, where glassblowing workshops were established at Aventicum, Lugdunum, and Mediolanum Saguntonum. Mastery of the technique also came about quite quickly, as evident in the intricate design and large volume of a vessel attributed to the glassblower Ennion from 60 AD. So the original vessel is about this big. So only not quite 100 years after the invention of glassblowing technique, you have artisans making things like this. Shortly before the invention of glassblowing, Cicero refers, in his speech in defense of Rabirius Posthumus, to glass as an extravagance. It is phallicus et fucosa, deceiving and superficial in value. Indeed, glass vessels continue to be valuable items well into the 1st century AD. Pliny makes mention of 2 beakers purchased for over 6,000 sestertii in the reign of Nero. He also states that by his time, glass had replaced gold and silver as a material used for luxury drinking cups. However, by the 1st century BC, one could already, according to Strabo, purchase a glass beaker for the cheap price of a kalkus, which is something along the lines of like 1/40th of a daily laborer's wages. So indicating that glass vessels were commonly available and no longer exclusively prestige goods at this time. The Roman glassblowing industry is both similar in magnitude and different in organization from other material industries of the Roman Empire. By the late 1st and early 2nd century AD, glassblowing had enabled the production of vessels to reach an unprecedented scale. Following Stern, the average annual output of an individual glassblower was likely around 11,000 vessels. Fleming estimates by the early 2nd century AD the total number of glass vessels produced in a year was at least 100 million. Combining both Stern's estimate of 11,000 and Fleming's estimate of 100 million for the total annual output of glassware, an estimate of roughly 9,000 for the number of glassblowers operating in the empire is possible. That is to say, only 0.016% of the total population. So while the total output of glassware alone may suggest glassblowing was a large-scale enterprise, this estimate for the number of glassblowers suggests the opposite. The exchange and transportation of glassware in the Roman Empire was both extensive within and outside the territory of the Roman Empire. Such was the intra-empire trade in glassware that designs developed in one region would quickly spread to the rest of the empire. The pattern now described as snake thread, for example, was developed in the eastern Mediterranean at the end of the 2nd century AD, but shortly thereafter it was adopted and commonly employed by glassblowers operating in the Rhineland. According to the Periplus Maris Erythrae, which is some sort of combined map and catalog for merchants for people sailing from here across into the Indian Ocean, Roman glass vessels are mentioned as being exported to northern India. In the same document, glass is said to have been sold as far south as the north coast of modern-day Somalia. Roman glass beakers are also commonly found in grave goods in mid-Iron Age Scandinavia. Profits from the glassware trade were also maximized by pairing the place of glass manufacturer with the place of vessel content production. For instance, an inscription from Pompeii which reads, "The area of the glassblower street or of the incense dealer quarter," seems to indicate that here glass vessels were sold together with their unguents. The glassware trade then was not only wide-ranging, but also quite lucrative. The production of glass-blown vessels continued in earnest into the late Roman Empire and well afterwards. In the eastern provinces, production reached its zenith in the 4th century AD. Further elaboration of the craft of glassblowing also occurred in the east in the late imperial period, as is evident in the development of Alexandrine glass cutting at this time. Glass lamps also became popular in this period and remained a matter of course for church lighting and synagogue lighting for centuries. And depicted here, a glass menorah from the 4th century AD. Certain glass vessels, such as these small, piddly ointment pots, continue to be produced well into the 8th century AD in the Middle East. While there was not a parallel fluid in glassware production during the late imperial period in the West, the presence of glassblowing nevertheless lingered. Luxury glass vessels continued to be produced well into the early Middle Ages in Italy and France. Let us now turn to the nature of Roman glass itself and the glass that is in the museum. Roman glass is by and large chemically uniform, due to raw glass being made in a select number of locations. Though the recent studies of Miss Brandy Lee McDonald from the nuclear reactor here at McMaster suggest there is a fair bit of chemical variety, perhaps indicating that the glass in the museum's collection did not come from one center of raw glass production. It's actually quite a large sample of Roman glass, rather than coming from one place in one period in time. In the 1st century AD, glass was differentiated based on its color. That which was naturally blue-green was referred to as Judean, and that which was artificially decolorized as Alexandrian. In a Diocletian's price edict on maximum prices, Alexandrian glass, that is clear glass, is listed as nearly twice as much as its Judean counterpart, that is naturally blue-green. So when you're looking at lots of frescoes in elite contexts, typically what's emphasized is the transparency of the vessel. So the more transparent the glass is, the more expensive it was in the Roman Empire. So, of the securely datable specimens in the E.T. Salmon Gallery, the majority of glassware indicates a date range from the first 2 centuries AD, which is in line with what has been described concerning the original fluid of the Roman glassblowing industry. There are, however, several pieces that date to the 4th century AD and later, perhaps reflecting the resurgence of the eastern provinces in glassware manufacturing. Artifact 28, for example, is akin to the previously noted small ointment pots that get produced well into the 8th century AD. In terms of unguentaria, which are perhaps the most common vessels in Roman glass, containing perfumes or oils, expensive cosmetics, there is this example, which follows the known typology from the 1st century AD, very simple body shaped like this, but then the exhibit also features examples from the 2nd century AD, where the neck of the unguentaria becomes more elongated, but the body becomes more of a bell shape with a large indentation on the bottom. There's also pre-Roman glass in the collection, which is very interesting because it's very hard to come by. This being also a perfume oil, cosmetic oil container, somewhere from the 3rd to 1st century BC, perhaps made in Alexandria. The large quantity of flagons and beakers in the collection also likely represents the predominance of household tableware in the production of glassware. There's also possibly examples of Alexandrian glass, that more expensive, completely transparent in Artifact 58 and 133. The excellent preserved state of most of these vessels may also indicate that they were all recovered from funerary contexts. The E.T. Salmon Gallery then does justice to Roman glass. Viewing the exhibit, one gets an idea of the characteristics of Roman glass: the predominance of cosmetic containing unguentaria, the range of domestic wares, and the more expensive vessels of Alexandrian glass. The exhibit also demonstrates the longevity of the industry, featuring artifacts from the 1st century AD and earlier, and examples from the late imperial period. In short, the gallery is an ideally representative sample of Roman glassware, demonstrating the ubiquity and craftsmanship of Roman glass throughout time and space. It provides an intriguing window into ancient daily life and material culture, into the day-to-day conditions of the Roman world. Thank you.